Hi, I'm Colin Duggan, the CEO and co-founder of BG Networks.
Hey, I'm Roman Lysicki, CTO and co-founder for BG Networks.
And I'm Eric Pettis, medical device cybersecurity with BG Networks.
Roman, do you have some news for us today to kick us off?
I do. I told you right before here, this is hot off the press. And you actually asked me, is this as important as the CISA warning that came out? It's another CISA alert for a medical device that they just published today.
I haven't seen this yet, Roman, so this is
exciting. And it involves another backdoor.
No way.
I'm not kidding. So this is the cardio health monitoring app. They have an iOS and an Android app that connects to a device which takes blood pressure and heart data. And they found two things in this alert. One was related to a backdoor. So in the preferences file of the application, they found username and password that gives you access to a developer credentials for a production cloud interface that you can use as a backdoor to issue engineering commands through a UI, sending hex codes over. So it was a backdoor that was secured with a password, but the password was exposed in a preferences list inside the application. So that was one of them. And the other one is on the device itself. It allows you to send a start command interface over Bluetooth, an unencrypted Bluetooth interface that will tell the device to constantly restart, which would enable a denial of service against that Bluetooth interface.
Yeah, that's similar to some of the Bluetooth vulnerabilities and exposures that have been identified in the past, where you constantly send messages to Bluetooth and you cause the battery of the device to be drained because the Bluetooth interface is always essentially turned on.
And it's also the importance of doing good authentication in your pairing process with Bluetooth. So you're only receiving a start command from an actual authenticated device and then using encryption for that communication.
Got it. So Roman, tell me about the backdoor a little bit more. It sounds like it's probably there for engineering purposes. Is this a similar situation where engineering code was left in and probably shouldn't have been left in? And I'm referring to the CISA warning from a couple of weeks ago.
Well, it sounds like it's an interface. It's certainly engineering code, functionality meant for engineering purposes to be able to issue commands to the device. Now, that's not necessarily bad on its own if you have security to properly secure that, such as having a strong password and authentication method for gaining access to that engineering backdoor. The challenge was then that the password that was exposed in this preferences file gave you access to those developer accounts that allowed you access to the engineering backdoor.
Okay, got it. And is this exploitable by someone remotely, or do you have to have access to the phone, to exploit this?
It sounds like if you have, it's a good question. I don't think that was explicitly determined there. It does sound like from just the way it's described that it would be through a cloud interface, but it's not explicitly stated that way. So you might require access to the phone itself.
Okay, got it. And if you get access, does it allow like remote kind of control of other features of the phone? Like, so I would have my personal phone, I install this app, and now my phone is vulnerable because I've installed this app.
No, it doesn't seem to. No indication that it affects that. Just affects the phone and the app itself being able to send. Sorry, the device itself being able to send hex codes as part of that engineering interface.
Okay, got it. Okay, great. Look, Roman, thanks. Like I mentioned, I hadn't seen this one, and so thanks.
They just published it today, so it's very new, and the mitigations, just to kind of, if somebody watching here is using one of these devices, is when you're not using the device, disable Bluetooth on your phone. and only make sure you're using trusted mobile app from providers, and try not to use it in range of public spaces where attackers could target it.
Good to know, Roman, and it seems like we're getting a lesson in backdoors from CISA this past couple of weeks.
It does.
Great, great. Should we jump in, guys, to the topic for this week? We're continuing to step-by-step go through the FDA's September 2023 guidance on cybersecurity. And the topic this week is security risk management. Do you guys want to jump in? Any other comments before we do?
Yeah, security risk management, it's a broad topic. There's lots of details underneath it. And I think in the FDA guidance, they're really thinking of what are all the things that should go into there, and how does it touch upon your entire development life cycle, or I think the total product development life cycle, as they would call that there. So it is a broad topic, and there's a lot of subparts to it, and we can walk through some of those at high level.
Yeah, and it is interesting to compare cyber risk to safety risk. At the end of the day, risk management is risk management, and both cyber and safety follow the same process, but for different reasons.
That's great, Eric, and that's a kind of an important distinction. And maybe just to jump right into it, how do these things interact? You've got a security process, you've got a safety process.
Well, any cyber threat or vulnerability that could potentially impact patient safety is kind of ported over to the safety side, under the ISO 14971. And then any safety hazards that could potentially impact cyber are handed off from the safety side to the cyber side. So they shake hands and they communicate with each other anytime there's a need to.
Yeah. So at one of the high level topics you would need to cover in this would be just risk analysis. How do you analyze your security risk analysis? And so at a very high level, you have typical process would be identify what are the assets you care about, what are the potential damage scenarios that could result from threats against your device. For those damage scenarios, what are the impacts? And then what are the attack paths? And so now when you get impacts and attack paths, that tells you the impact on patients, the impact on safety, that's a connection over in to the safety aspects quality management that you need to facilitate. That's going to help define the impact of it, and then how easy is it for someone to attack? What's the exploitability? That's going to help you analyze what the risk actually is in your system.
Yeah, and then I love how you brought up exploitability. It's the cool side, really, of cyber, because on the safety side, we talk about probabilities, right? But on the cyber side, you can't use probabilities because the sands are shifting every single day, as evidenced by the new item that Roman brought up previously. So the exploitability on the cyber side, it's a bit more complicated than probability, and it's pretty cool, and we can get into that later when we dive into future sessions.
So you get exploitability. This is like, hey, somebody compromised a password, somebody found an attack path, keys aren't maybe stored securely, things aren't signed correctly. This is the exploitability aspect. Then you have an impact aspect. So you got these two things. How do you come up with risk?
Yeah, usually that's then, I think of it as a matrix. You're looking at what's the impact of the attack compared to how easy it is. So at one extreme, you have an attack that's very exploitable, and you have an impact that could be catastrophic and cause actual injury to a patient. That's your highest risk. You absolutely need to manage that. On the other hand, you may have a risk which is, my risk is it's really hard to execute the attack. So the exploitability would be very low. I need a quantum computer and I need to run that for 6 months, and I need 2 PhDs to figure that out. Like, that's really hard to execute. But the impact might still be very high, but the combination of those might be, that's an unreasonable risk for us. Sorry, it's a managed risk. We're okay with that. It's acceptable. So it's really looking at the combination of these two. You typically define internally a risk matrix that would allow you to basically plan out all of those and decide the threshold beyond which you need to put risk controls into place.
Yeah, and that's exactly where the safety side intersects with cyber. On the cyber side, we can well, maybe not easily, but effectively determine the exploitability. And if it does impact patient safety, okay, fine. So what's the rating on the safety side? Well, we don't deal with that. That comes out of the safety side. So we have to then go over to the quality or regulatory people and say, okay, let's look at your DFEMA or your hazard analysis, and for this particular vulnerability that has this level of exploitability that could impact the safety. Now, what does your risk management document say the severity of that safety risk is? And then that gets plugged into the matrix along with the exploitability rating to get the ultimate risk number.
Great. So you guys are talking about evaluating risk. So there's going to be some number of risks that you say after evaluation, these are unacceptable, these are uncontrolled. We need to do something about these. And so what do? You have some things you're worried about, they need to be addressed. What's the next step?
It's defining your risk controls, your cybersecurity requirements to say, well, I know the attack path. How can I break that attack path? This attack path was a weak password or a weak credential utilized for authentication. My security control would be, I need to have a stronger authentication mechanisms relying upon the latest TLS 1.3 or greater for that communication. That becomes now a cybersecurity requirement that mitigates that potential threat as part of your process. So then you have to go, of course, implement that as well. And the FDA, they listed off 8 different cybersecurity categories or controls in general that you should consider in terms of this, to help mitigate the risk that you find from cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm. Well said, Roman.
And I've gone through these risks. I've got controls to mitigate. Then what happens? Do I go back and evaluate again?
Well, you go back to your evaluation tool and you recalculate. So, initially on a scale of 1 to 5, you've got negligible, low, moderate, high, very high. So anything moderate, high, or very high requires a risk mitigation. Roman talked about how you come up with that. After you come up with the mitigation, you plug the mitigation into the spreadsheet or your risk management tool, and you recalculate. And if it drops to a negligible or low, you're okay. If it's still moderate, you can accept it with a rationale. If it's high or very high, that's when it gets ported over to the safety side, and then they start using the risk-benefit ratio tool to try to justify it.
And you might also need to provide instructions in your information for use that would help mitigate.
Yeah.
So it might be a combination of those security controls as well as saying the device needs to be operated in this way. And those combined could then be, okay, that residual risk that we have, we're okay with that risk. And you're kind of documented the process and the rationale for doing so.
Absolutely. And due to the nature of the devices that we're talking about, the mitigation, it to me is approximately 50% things that we're going to do, to design it out. But the other 50%, it's labeling, which then goes to the user, and hopefully the user will follow the labeling requirements to do the mitigation.
That's great. That's great, guys. So what we've talked about here is we want to perform a risk analysis. So we're looking at the impacts. We're looking at the exploitability of the network interfaces and other things into the device. We're evaluating the risk. We're determining the security controls. And then we go back and do one more evaluation of the residual risk. And if everything, like you said, Eric, is very low or low, I think that was the ratings.
Negligible and low.
Thank you, thank you. Then you're good. Okay, that's great. So that always happens right before anybody's implemented security, right? And you've got a clean slate, and then you go to the team. You say, start designing now because we understand the security that we need. Is that the way it happens?
It can. Depends on when we engage. You can design cybersecurity in from the beginning. It's part of your software lifecycle development process in your SPDF. But sometimes people come to us and the design's done. And so, some of the mitigations require code changes.
And even if you've designed cybersecurity up front at the beginning, and then you hand over that with all your security requirement control mechanisms, that software, as it's being developed, you're going to identify new threats. You're going to realize this control isn't quite implemented on this processor or this operating system in the right way. So you're going to have to iterate. It's not a one and done. It's an iterative process. You keep iterating. You keep iterating. We're still talking about design phase. You're not done iterating. Even after post-market, you still have to iterate.
Yeah, I mean, on the safety side, the mantra is risk management is for life. So you get customer complaints, post-market surveillance, sustaining engineering changes, and yeah, you have to always go back to your risk management file and update it. But on the cyber side, it's like that on steroids because the threats are multiplying on a daily basis. And that's what makes probability a no-no and exploitability the rule.
That's right, Eric. And post-market is something that the FDA and how important they think it is, I think they put a fine point on with the commentary that came out after the 524B section got added to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. This was in March of 2023. And they said 4 things, and 3 of those things had to do with post-market, which was you need to have an SBOM so what software you have in your device. You need to have threat intelligence, so you're watching out to see if any of that software has a new vulnerability or has been exploited. And then number 3, you need to have a software update capability so that if there is a vulnerability, you could do something about it. So to me, that's summarized as, they don't want devices out in the field in use that have vulnerabilities that are persistent in them. And then, by the way, the 4th thing they said in that March 2023 document was you need to follow a process. So, I think that's pretty good advice, but I think post-market was really highlighted, at least to me when I saw them come out with that document, and really said to me that the FDA is particularly keen on making sure that post-market activities, like you said, Eric, cybersecurity, I guess, we could say is for life, right? So maybe you said safety, but also.
Yeah, and when you look at those 4 requirements of 524B, I mean, honestly, I look at it and I go, really? You really have to tell us to do those 4 things? I mean, and my apologies to anybody that's watching this cast today that maybe it's new for them that they have to do those 4 things, or maybe they didn't, and my apologies, but it's pretty how do you control anything without an SBOM? You don't even know what you've got. I mean, without an SBOM, you can't even check for vulnerabilities,
It would make it very hard to have any threat intelligence to identify when there are vulnerabilities in your code. And I think that post-market process, this ties back into the risk assessment.
Absolutely.
If you find another vulnerability in software you're using, you don't just simply say like, oh, okay, I'll just update to the latest version. You're going to have to actually go through the process of analyzing the threat, determining what the impact on your system was. It might be a vulnerability that doesn't affect any code you're using in that library.
Yeah.
So you have to do that assessment. So you might decide you need to mitigate. You may decide you don't need to mitigate, but it has to go through the process.
Yeah.
And that risk management is a central part of both pre-market, post-market.
Yeah, and I will add one kind comment. We deal a lot with startups, okay? So with a startup, these things can be new. It can be discovery because they're operating on a shoestring. They don't have a full deck of competencies yet. And they do need our help, and they do need this, and they do need to be told. Whereas, the top tiered pharma or drug companies out there, they're already aware that they need to have this regardless because of their level of maturity.
Eric, also work with startups that do a great job at security. They're just looking for an outside assessment to really make sure, hey, I need a pen test, I need threat mitigation testing to really understand. Did they think through everything? You don't want to kind of get stuck in the bubble of what you thought about during design. Get that external expertise to be able to give you the insight to look for those additional gaps or holes in your security as well. So it's a lot of value in just strengthening the security.
And we were pretty particular in the prep for this call to use terminology that was consistent with something called TIR57. There is a more up-to-date version of that called AAMI SW96. I think it's 2023. And those are risk management processes, and the FDA supports these. And the terminology is security risk analysis, risk evaluation, risk control, residual risk, and post-market. So in a nutshell, I think those are the 5 things. Those are kind of the main sections of SW96.
Yeah, and you don't want to get wrapped around the axle. Like if a quality or regulatory person is very ISO 14971 centric, they should be. I mean, that's the deal on the safety side, but it's different on the cyber side. It's SW96, TIR57, and it is a bit different. So it's good to keep a division between those 2 standards. Make sure there's a handoff between the 2 of them, but don't confuse terminology back and forth, or you could get wrapped around the axle.
Yeah, great point, Eric. And there's a pretty famous diagram if you open up SW96 figure 2. It shows those intersection points, of risk analysis, evaluation, and control, where, like you talked about earlier, Eric, these touch points between, ISO 14971 and SW96. Well, I think we probably should wrap. Anything else for this webinar?
No, just a teaser for the next one, maybe in order as we kind of go a level deeper on this.
Great. And what's the teaser, Roman? Sorry.
We've talked about this at a very high level, just the 5 main categories there, but we certainly want to go deeper down. And a lot of these topics, we can demystify them in terms of what they mean, how we can do them, getting the process in place, making sure it's tied in with your quality management. That certainly will take time and effort to facilitate. But I think what we're going to do here is help demystify the details of that. The process itself, how to think about safety, security, risk management, risk analysis. We can demystify those in our future talks in this series.
Excellent. And just a quick mention, I meant to say this earlier, is we also do webinars with partners. And we had an excellent webinar today with our partner ICS. They're a software services company, and Milton Yarberry presented. And then also from Trusonic, we had Richard Hayden, and we covered the 8 cybersecurity control categories that the FDA requires. So we'll provide that link. Look out for announcements to that webinar. You can watch that on demand. And with that, I will wrap it up for today. So Roman, Eric, thanks. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.